Okay, so the poem is called the Munfarijah. We started it last week. It's written by Imam Ibn Nahwi. I've got YouTube, so no worries. Okay, good. So it's written by somebody called Ibn Nahwi. Ibn Nahwi was from North Africa. He was a sheikh that studied for many years, 20 years plus, went all around the Muslim kind of lands, and experienced a lot of kickback from the scholarly community, in that he was quite forward thinking, and he had found himself in a environment, in a time that was, in terms of knowledge, it had become very stagnated, and the reason why that had happened was not necessarily because those scholars were not scholars, or that somehow everyone was misguided and only even Nahwi had found guidance. It was nothing like that. It was just, in a time of political turbulence, what you have to do is, the first thing that you've got to do is you've got to really buckle down and get your foundations absolutely. You've got to protect. It's something that we are currently, or we have been going through for the last 100, 200 years, in fact, probably around 200 years now. Because when the caliphate, the Muslim caliphate, came to an end, on paper it was in the early 1920s, but in reality it had fallen probably 100 years earlier. I'm not going to go into the politics of it, but the reality was it probably fallen about 100 years earlier, and this was just just the unraveling had already happened. The great game, as they called it, had already been won. So the caliphate, the theoretical kind of ending of the caliphate, was just a matter of signing on a dotted line. The same thing happened in Muslim Spain. Muslim Spain in reality fell in probably around the turn of the 13th century. It only hung around until the end of the 15th century, just as a matter of, it was a bit of a paper exercise. It kept just moving from one kind of a kingdom to another amongst the Muslims, and there was a lot of infighting happening. So it was always going to be it was an inevitability that the Muslims had faced. And when that happens, as it happened to us, one of the first things that the community does is that you kind of knuckle down, and you rather than focusing on development and forward thinking, what you do is you basically just knuckle everything down, and it's about maintenance. It's just survival. So you go into survival mode, and that will last you maybe 10 years, 20 years, because 10 or 20 years in the grand scheme of things, you're not going to stagnate. But as that time goes on, and you're constantly teaching stuff from the past, and you're trying to keep alive in people's minds the books of the past, as time goes on, it becomes almost less and less relevant to people. So although it starts with a very good intention, 50 years, 100 years from that point, what people see is a regurgitation of the same information that's given to them, much of which is no longer relevant to them. I would even argue that maybe what we've experienced is even more extreme, in that in the time of Ibn Nahwi, it was about the madhabs, whereas what we've experienced is the Industrial Revolution. Because when the Industrial Revolution took place, the Muslims had no response to it. We were debating as to whether you can print a Quran, whether you can mass produce Qurans, whether you can listen to radio, listen to Quran on the radio, and these sorts of things that we were wrestling with when the world was just plowing on ahead. We just didn't know how to, we had no tools to answer that question. We had no authority to centralize those ideas in. And so that cost us dearly. And alhamdulillah, I think things are very positive now. Things are looking up in that we're finding our feet again. And the scholarly community in that fragmentation is starting to find, I suppose, some order in the chaos. But the cost of that, nonetheless, is a stagnation that took place. And that's probably what Ibn Nahwi experienced to some extent in his time. He was trying to think ahead, teach, really intense, deep books, telling people that, look, do away with everything you know about Islam. Let's start from the Quran, let's start from the Sunnah, and let's rebuild. And it was a challenge to people to become, true scholars, inheritors of the Prophet ﷺ. But what he felt, what he experienced around him were scholars that were saying, look, this is not the time or place for it. We are Malikis. We teach these books. This is our syllabus, and so on and so forth. And he just felt like it was a waste of 20 years of his life. So he moved from place to place to place, and eventually he was exiled because he was seen as a rogue scholar who had kind of lost his way. And it was in that exile. Is there any way we can read the poem that these seminars are about? It's a good question. Can we, if someone can put a link up to the poem, that would be really helpful. I think online you can probably find some translations of it that, if someone can do that for me, inshallah, that would be. So the poem's called Qasida al-Munfarijah. It's often translated as the poem of relief or the poem of deliverance by Ibn Nahwi. Right, so the Shaykh Ibn Nahwi wrote this poem in exile, and it was a lament of, well, it wasn't really a lament. He would have been in that, he would have been feeling feeling rejected, but he turns to God. So in that state, he turns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he writes this poem to say, although the community has rejected me, in truth, I completely submit to your, to you, O Allah, and that I know you will always give me relief, give us respite whenever calamity befalls us. So it's very much a poem of hope. In whatever deep difficulty you might find yourself, if you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then anything can be overcome. Absolutely anything can be overcome. That's why his very first couplet, which I covered last week, is he begins, Ishtaddi azmatu tanfariji kad adhana layluki bil balaji. That peak, O calamity, so that deliverance may come. So he addresses it directly. So this couplet, I've entitled it Empowerment, because it's all about facing a difficulty and taking it head on and not being afraid of it. Yeah, so the way you do that is you have to completely just take ownership and control of it rather than letting it control you. And it's in, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Ra'ad, Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Allah says that He does not change the condition of a people until they themselves change it from within themselves. Yeah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, so this is also in the same spirit, which is take control yourself. If you take one step to correcting your way, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take that step to you. As the hadith Qudsi tells us, a hadith Qudsi is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala narrates, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells something to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam from himself and tells him to convey it to us. So hadith Qudsi means it's the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam telling us the words of God, but it's not classed as Quran. It's not classed as Quran. In that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that if you come walking to me, I will come running to you. It's metaphorical speech, it's not literal. Yeah. Anyone takes some steps to God, God takes 10 steps back towards him for every step that you take. So the metaphor here is about whenever you strive towards Allah, then the journey isn't just from you to God, there's a journey from God to you. Yeah. So that's the thing, that's where hope comes from, because if we put all of our hope into our direction towards our journey towards God, then all you constantly see is your own weaknesses. But actually, if you recognize, realize, and accept that for every step that you take, with whatever faults that we may have, whatever sins that we carry, whichever burdens that hold us down, for every step that we take towards God, God takes 10 steps towards us. So have you put your hope in God, not in yourself? Yeah. So if your steps fall short, know that God's steps will never fall short of us. So this is why it's the Shaykh really calls towards empowering us to take control, because in us taking that control, you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now will respond to that. Yeah. Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. God does not change the condition of a people or a person or your state or the way you feel until you take ownership of it and you decide that I'm going to change it for myself. This is the advice that you'd give to somebody who is, you know, a psychologist or a psychiatrist would say to somebody who is in a clinical kind of, you know, has a clinical mental health, you know, condition. The advice would be about for them to do whatever's within their means to try and help themselves. You cannot force somebody to go and see a doctor. Yeah, they have to accept in that small window that they may get of recognizing that something isn't right with me. In that window, that person has to just muster up the courage to go and get help. And when they do, people come toward, they will help you. But the moment you disengage, it becomes ever increasingly more difficult to get the help that you need. And the result of that is it escalates and things get more and more difficult. It gets harder and harder to ask questions and ask for help. And it gets even harder for the people that are around that person. When, you know, there's one thing when you are suffering, it's a completely different ball game altogether when you see people that you love suffering around you. Yeah, it's much harder to see people around you suffer than it is sometimes to suffer yourself. So he says, "Ishtaddi azmatu tanfariji." He says, "Peak, O calamity, so that that ease can come, that so deliverance can come." And this is in light of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala tells us in you know, the Quran, "Inna ma'al usri yusran, inna ma'al usri yusra." That with every difficulty comes ease. With every difficulty comes ease. And also, it's from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala telling us, "Inna Allah la yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha, laha ma kasabat wa 'alayha ma iktasabat." That when Allah tells us that you know, God does not burden a soul more than which it can cope with, and to it is what it acquires, and against it is whatever it acquires. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even what people don't recite is the rest of that, which is Rabbana la tu'akhidna in nasina or akhta'na. And this is where in Surah Baqarah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was reciting this, part of this verse is where you turn to God. Allah tells us to turn to him in that state of when we feel like the burdens are getting too much, everything's weighing down on us. You say, Rabbana la tu'akhidna in nasina, oh Allah, don't take us to task for that which we've forgotten. Oh akhta'na, oh even if we've made a mistake. Rabbana wa la tahmil alayna isran kama hamaltahu ala alladhina min qablina. Oh Allah, don't take us to task for any oversight that we may have made, like the way you have taken to task people that came before us. وَلَا تُحَمِّلْنَا مَا لَا طَاقَةَ لَنَا. And oh Allah, do not burden us more than than we are capable of. وَعْفُ عَنَّا وَاغْفِرْ لَنَا. So you are in this verse, you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It begins with لَا يُكَلِّفُ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وُسْعَهَا. God does not burden a person, a soul, more than it can bear. And it ends with, oh Allah, وَعْفُ عَنَّا, overlook our mistakes. وَاغْفِرْ لَنَا, and forgive our mistakes that you don't overlook. وَارْحَمْنَا, and oh Allah, have mercy on us. أَنْتَ مَوْلَانَا فَانْصُرْنَا عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. And then you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect you. So you ask for his, you know, Allahumma, what is it? What's the dua? إِنَّكَ عَفُوٌّ كَرِيمٌ تُحِبُّ الْعَفْوَ فَاعْفُ عَنَّا. So you appeal to God's generosity and his desire to overlook. And he said, oh Allah, you overlook and you love to overlook. So overlook our mistakes. But then this also is a belt and braces of the surah. It then says, but that which you do not overlook, oh Allah, forgive us for that. And then so after forgiveness, then the all-encompassing is, oh Allah, have mercy on us. Have mercy on us. Meaning all of this is recognizing that we are deficient, we're weak, we make mistakes. So you know, in that, I mean, in the spirit of this verse, it would be if you want God to forgive you. So in the spirit of Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin, the verse, Allah does not change the state of a people until they change themselves. What that means is, if you want God to forgive you, you have to first forgive yourself. If you want God to overlook, then you need to overlook your own faults. If you want God to have mercy on you, then you have to be a bit more merciful to yourself. And similarly, if we want God to forgive us, we need to forgive others. If we want God to be merciful towards us, we've got to have mercy towards the people around us. And all of this, by the way, is completely you find all of this in hadith, which I'm not going to go into, but there's ample hadith. In fact, the most well-known hadith, which is musalsal bil awwaliyya, it's the first hadith that almost, every shaykh teaches their student, which is ar-rahimuna yarhamuhumur rahman irhamu man fil ard yarhamkum man fis sama. The hadith is all about mercy, that those who are merciful in this world then know that the one that is the creator of the heavens and the earth will have mercy on you. And the same for forgiveness. We have hadith and forgiveness. All of these things are well documented in the Quran and in hadith. And those of you who are going to be joining us in the Kitab al-Azkar, we'll go through all of this, and you'll see how many beautiful hadith there are on forgiveness, on mercy, on respect, and all of these things that are just so central to our deen, absolutely critical to our deen. So qad aadhana layluki bil baladi, and in this kind of empowerment mindset, he says that when that difficulty becomes intense, when it's at its most intense, when the ishtidad is at its absolute apex, when it's extreme, rather than saying I can't bear with it, I can't cope with it, the mindset should be that you can't do any worse. Because when it gets to its absolute extreme, it can only, once you reach a zenith, the only way is down. The only way is down, which means you take control and say, you whatever it is that you're going through, I'm yours until you give me the sign that you can't do any worse. Because the moment you can't do any worse to me is the moment I take control, because now it's me. So ishtaddi azmatu tanfariji, O peak of calamity, so that deliverance may come. For your night has announced your departure. Qad azana layluki, that your darkness, you reaching your most intense, me reaching my absolute worst, is a sign that you are departing. The second verse goes wa zalamul layli lahu surujun hatta yaghshahu abu suruji. This couplet, each couplet I've given it a title which I think is befitting, personally I think fits with the text. Let me put, I got the text. I don't know if I've got the text up actually. Just for those of you who want to follow it, I might even have it. Let's try this now and fail. Those of you who are not, don't worry. This is not, I'm not holding anyone to. Where is it? Have I got it up? Have I not got it up? Give me a second. Oh, that's not even shareable, this. Okay. Good luck if you can read this. This is the trouble that we had was when we were with our teacher, he basically forced us to read off pretty much text that looked like manuscripts. So what looks like illegible handwriting to you is the kind of text that I'm most comfortable with, strangely enough. Let me just see if I can navigate this. So where the line is, that is the text. So here's وَظَلَامُ اللَّيْلِ لَهُ سُرُجٌ. The rest of this is a commentary. The rest of this is a commentary. So it says وَظَلَامُ اللَّيْلِ لَهُ سُرُجٌ حَتَّى يَغْشَاهُ أَبُو السُّرُجِ. I need to find a better, so if someone put it up already. So I will share the PDF with English. Oh, perfect. Is that in Dad? That is in Dad, isn't it? Oh, good. Okay. Let me get rid of this because you guys just won't be able to make sense of this, and someone will share a PDF of it so you can see it. And I'll try and find a neater version for you all to be able to look at. Or I might just nick that one. Okay. وَظَلَامُ اللَّيْلِ لَهُ سُرُجٌ حَتَّى يَغْشَاهُ أَبُو السُّرُجِ. That the darkness of night, so this one I've called it perspective, because this couplet here is it's a bit of a journey we're going on. So each couplet is like the next stage in how you overcome difficulty. That's probably the way to look at this. So the second stage, yeah, I suppose if it's like a chain rather than second stage, it's coupled with empowering yourself, the mindset has to change, but also part of that mindset is, number one, it's that you take the fear head on rather than turning away from fear and running, which is the mindset that we have when we're afraid of calamities, either fear of a calamity, or when we're in it, the fear of it never going. Can you please download whatever PDF of those shares, and then easy to follow along with. So وَظَلَامُ اللَّيْلِ لَهُ سُرُجٌ حَتَّى يَغْشَاهُ أَبُو السُّرُجِ. This is about perspective, because the second aspect of that mindset shift is when we're in difficulty, when we are experiencing something, and all of us can, if you're not going through something right now, put yourself in that moment when you did go through something in the past. And for some of you, for some of us, this is a kind of calamity that we're in at the moment. The COVID-19 is a calamity for those of us who are lost loved ones, or those of us who are living with people, or are in a high risk category where we fear for ourselves. That's not to say that you can't be healthy and still suffer at the hands of COVID-19, but in terms of the fear that's running through our minds, it's probably for our loved ones, our elderly, those who are particularly sick and therefore susceptible. So it's definitely a calamity. What I was trying to say was, there might be certain things personal to you. So maybe you've lost a loved one in this, or another circumstance. And in that moment, if someone was to, if you were to stop and ask yourself, what do you feel? What do you see? Yeah. What would go through your mind? If you could articulate, it's almost impossible to do so, but if you were to try and articulate what's going through your mind, what might that look like? And what the Shaykh is saying is, وَظَلَامُ اللَّيْلِ لَهُ سُرُجٌ, is he's saying, look for the glimmers of hope when you're in that frame of mind. What that means is, if you cannot stumble into handling calamity with ease, or as relatively with ease, you have to prepare for it. Yeah, just like anything else in our life, you have to make some preparation for the what we will inevitably face, which is that people around us that we love will die. Nobody lives forever. We do not live forever. So it's an inevitability. It's much easier. It's far easier to pretend it won't happen. Yeah, it's far easier to believe that somehow it won't happen. The trouble is that when it does happen, rather than if, when it happens, we're ill prepared or not prepared at all for it. What that means is that we are literally in, and that's why I use this word zalam, darkness. We are in territory that we're just not familiar with, and we can't navigate it. And when you can't navigate a territory, that's just, if you're in a territory that you do not understand, the fear is absolute, it takes over. And when fear takes over, then there's no thinking rationally, there's no thinking clearly, there's no, planning, there's nothing happening. You are basically in the worst position you can be to overcome difficulty. Yeah. And the sad reality is that most of us do this. Most of us, all of us, in fact, to some extent do this, is that we find ourselves completely unhinged by a calamity, and we don't know how to maneuver through it, how we get through it, how we get past it, because we're not prepared for it. Even though it's the one certainty that we would all have calamity, because death is a type of calamity for all of us. So it's the absolute guaranteed thing that we're all going to go through, or we are going through, or we've gone through in the past. And yet it's the one thing we don't really prepare for. You hear people say prepare for death, right? You hear ulama talking about preparing for death and always living as though you live in a, as a stranger, which is what the hadith says, kun fi dunya ka'abir as-sabil, live as though you're a traveler. All of these things are absolutely true, but I think we miss the point when we think of those hadiths and those preparing for death seminars, because what it means, what we assume is somehow just think about death, but it's not. It's preparing for the fact that actually change your mindset, as in think about it, think about your death and the people around you, and how would we cope with it, and how do you strengthen your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that the loss is not a loss, but it's a temporary departure. That's the difference, because if our faith in God is strong, if we can somehow focus on our strength of faith with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then when somebody leaves, it's literally a temporary departure. In fact, in Arabic, when they say death, they say, Imam Ghazali, he defines it as, he says, it's intiqal. Yeah, he says it's just a transfer from one world into another world. So it's not the end. But yet when we feel, when we're in a calamity, I'm using death as an example, but it feels like it's completely the end. And we're overrun by fear, the fear of the unknown, which is how are you going to, a lot of it is, Imam Ibn Ata'illah Sikandari says, it's the greatest show of selfishness. Essentially it's the greatest show of selfishness, because when somebody dies, we cry, and he says, you don't cry for them, you cry for yourself. All our tears are because we're going to miss that person. I won't be able to see them again. How will I survive? How will I cope without them? How much of it is dedicated to them? So Ibn Ata'illah sees it as one of the greatest signs of our kind of our own desire to self-preserve and our own kind of desire for ourselves, which is why Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he says, Ibn Ata'illah says something similar actually, that when somebody dies in the house, when somebody dies and the people around are crying, he says, the angel of death visits that house and he looks to each person and says, I'm coming for you too. We just don't hear it. And then there's there's a narration that says, he says, if you knew what came after, then you would cry less for them and more for yourself. Yeah. That we would cry for ourselves. If we knew what really came after, we'd cry for ourselves more. As in crying for ourselves in the sense that we think about death for ourselves rather than that selfish, I miss that person. Right? And I say selfish, but I hope people understand. It's not about diminishing the loss of somebody, because that is painful regardless. But there's a difference between feeling a sense of loss for somebody, which is completely rooted in God, and sense of loss purely from our own personal point of view, because we have examples in the Prophet ﷺ where he cried for his losses. He cried for his son Ibrahim, for his daughter. It's the Prophet ﷺ had he experienced losses too, and he told us how to cope with those losses, because when the Sahaba asked him, why do you cry? Why are you crying at the death of your son? And he said, he said, look, the eyes may shed tears. He says, but Allah, if this is your decree, then we're completely content with it. Yeah. So it's that being in a state of both heart, mind, body, and soul being completely connected. And the tears are about completely rooted in the temporary separation that you're experiencing, rather than the belief that you'll never see them again, or the fear that you have purely for yourself of not being able to speak to that person or know that they're present and so on. So meaning purely about the self. He says, وَظَلَامُ اللَّيْلِ لَهُ سُرُجٌ. So this is about perspective, and that it's about having perspective whenever we're going through difficulty, which is, as I said, it hinges on us accepting that we have to be prepared. So the key is preparation. And COVID-19 is a good example of what happens when we're not prepared. Hatta yaghshahu Abu Suruji. It says, until, he said, the darkness of night, he said, even the darkest of nights has stars. Hatta yaghshahu Abu Suruji. He says, until that is the father of all those stars, enshrouds them and takes over. So there's an interesting thing here in that, firstly, he talks about this night and day comparison, right? He throws that metaphor out there. And we know that in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about night and day. There's actually 37 occasions when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to night and day and juxtaposes the two. And what we know is in the Quran, the word layl, always precedes nahar. The word for day always, the word for night always precedes the word for day. Yeah. So what's the reason for that? The reason for that is that, in fact, Allah tells us in Surah Yasin, وَاللَّيْلُ سَابِقُ النَّهَارِ, even tells us that the night precedes the day. وَاللَّيْلُ سَابِقُ النَّهَارِ. Now you could say the night precedes the day. The night, precedes the day, if you wanted to, because it's true. Yeah. But why does the Quran always talk about the night preceding the day? It's because at a metaphorical level, it's all darkness is about hardship. It's about suffering. It's about the unknown. It's about fears. It's about anxieties. It's about all of those things that are packaged in this word, zulumat, darkness. It also includes sin, because in Arabic, the metaphor for sin is also zulumat. Yeah. For sayyi'at, darkness is a metaphor for sin, and light is a metaphor for good deeds. Yeah, like though the word wudu in Arabic, which is to do wudu, yeah, to wash yourself, comes from the root letters which have been switched around. This qalab happening here, come from the root letters which means daw. Yeah, wudu, wada'a, switched around is daw'un, dad, waw, hamza, which means light. And that's because we know from a hadith that people who did wudu on the day of resurrection, when they're resurrected, the limbs that we washed would be illuminated. Yeah. In another narration, the Prophet says that people would be raised with they would have the front, the forehead will be lit up. People who are prostrated to Allah, a bit like a horse. You see this, the ghurul muhajjalin is the white bit that you'll find on a horse. Yeah. The Prophet described the believers like that we will be resurrected in that way. Again, it's this reference to light, and light is a symbolic of success, of overcoming, of faraj, of deliverance, and darkness is of sin, of hardship, of all those evils, those things that we want to escape from. So God very deliberately tells us 37 times at least that for every darkness there is light. Light always follows the darkness. And he tells us, if completely, like for example, in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Shura, وَهُوَ الَّذِي يُنَزِّلُ الْغَيْثَ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا قَنَطُوا وَيَنْشُرُ رَحْمَتَهُ وَهُوَ الْوَلِيُّ الْحَمِيدُ. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so sometimes darkness is used as a metaphor for despair. Yeah, for metaphor for despair. And in a verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, say to my servants who are to my servants who believe in me, وَأَسْرَفُوا عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ, and who have wronged themselves, who have sinned, who have made mistakes. لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, do not ever have despair in the mercy of God. Meaning, don't be so absorbed by the darkness and forget that the light follows it. لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Allah said, do never have despair in the mercy of God. So we have this other verse where Allah said, هُوَ الَّذِي يُنَزِّلُ الْغَيْثَ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا قَنَطُوا, which clarifies that. And in this verse, Allah says, it is God who descends, who brings down al-ghayth. Al-ghayth in Arabic, it's used in reference to rain. Yeah, and the Arabs would use the word ghais for rain that gives life. Yeah, when you have that rain that comes down when it's most needed, and it hits that ground that's dry and completely barren, and it gives it light when it gets its life, when it gets those first shoots, which is a sign that, you know, we're going to have a good year. That's called ghais. And you have another word in Arabic which is closely related to, which is ghaus. Ghaus is somebody who helps. So by changing the waw to a ya, it's a reference to rain that helps people. In other words, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends ghayth. He sends his support through rain. But what's powerful about this verse is Allah tells us, he says, وَهُوَ الَّذِي it's he who sends, he describes himself in this way. It is he who sends down the rain that gives life to the barren land. بَعْدَ مَا قَنَتُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا قَنَتُوا after they مَا قَنَتُوا after they despaired. Yeah, after they despaired. وَيَنْشُرُ رَحْمَتَهُ and Allah says, and he spreads through it his mercy. Yeah, so Allah tells us that there are people that have despaired in the past, and at the point of despair they lost, that's what it's losing hope. And when they felt like that, God sent his mercy in the form of rain, which is a metaphor for help. And he gave life to a dead land. He gave life to dead hearts. He resuscitated us back into life, so that we have hope again. And he did that. He spread his mercy once again. And God says, وَهُوَ الْوَلِيُّ الْحَمِيدُ and it is he who is the guardian. Yeah, so it's a reminder that Allah is al-Wali. He is the one who's overseeing us. He's the guardian. And he's al-Hamid. He is the one that is deserving of all praise. Yeah. So this was وَظَلَامُ اللَّيْلِ لَهُ سُرُجٌ حَتَّى يَغْشَاهُ أَبُو السُّرُجِ. It has within it two things, or there's two perspectives you can look at this from. The first is this idea that when you see darkness, when you are at your lowest point, what do you see? Do you just see darkness? Yeah. Or do you see the glimmers of light? Yeah. وَظَلَامُ اللَّيْلِ لَهُ سُرُجٌ. Even the darkest of nights has glimmers of light, meaning the small stars. What he's saying is, do you have, there is blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ni'am of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala everywhere. Yeah. وَإِن تُعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. The Quran tells us, if you were to try and enumerate the blessings of God, you just wouldn't be able to do it. Even at your lowest point, if you look hard enough, no, not even hard enough, if you just shift your mindset, that's literally what it is. Imagine just looking at a night sky. If your mind, it's not even about sight, if your mind is focused on darkness, all you will see is darkness. If you adjust your eyes slightly by adjusting your mind, all you see is light. And I've experienced this, and those of you who have ever gone out on to a dark sky zone, and you've looked up expecting to see stars, and you just see you don't see any darkness, there's nothing, there's no fear. All you see is, you see the Milky Way across in the sky, and it's the most majestic thing that you'll ever see in your life, where you are completely, you see night sky surrounding you. This is the thing we don't get in where we live now, because we've got buildings all around us. We've never seen a full night sky, because what we see is just part of it, and then there's buildings everywhere. If you go somewhere to a flat plane and you look up, what you see is this: you're enveloped by earth, by sky. And when you look up and you just see not darkness, but what you see is just stars everywhere glimmering, and then you see shooting stars, and then you see some brighter stars and some some that appear to be moving. When you see all of that happening, and you just see, when you look up, you don't see darkness, you don't see stillness. What you see is you just see life. You see absolutely, you just see life up in the universe, and you see this beautiful band of the Milky Way. That's the potential that we have in a dark night, because the darker the night, the harder those stars shine, and the more you're able to see if you allow yourself to see it. So the first perspective is that when times are dark, it needs to be dark for you to see light. Yeah, it's Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anh. He once said, I think it's Imam Shafi'i that said it. I think it's in his Diwan, in fact. Yeah, it was Imam Shafi'i, I think, that said, he said, one of the greatest blessings of Allah, the easiest blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that he's given us good health. He said, but only the sick can see it. Just think about how powerful that is. That's something so obvious, and yet it takes a sick person to see it. Right? That's something to just reflect on. That there are certain ni'am of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that are so obvious, and it will take not having it to realize it. And what I often describe is, because, you know, when you come from a family of asthmatics, you appreciate breathing. And now with COVID-19, I'm sure all of us appreciate breathing. To breathe deep is such a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If there's any people here on, you know, online right now that have experienced or have, you know, breathing difficulties, will know what I'm talking about. To be able to take a deep breath in and feel like the air has filled your lungs is such a enormous blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just ask people that can't do it without coughing, without, you know, causing all sorts of havoc for themselves. It's a great blessing. Just take a breath in and think, Allah has given me the tawfiq to do this, before we lose it. Yeah, before we lose it. So it's the times when things are at their darkest that we should begin, or we can, if we really pay attention, that's when we become aware of the ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we allow that to happen. Yeah. It's when times are really, really low that you will, if you focus your attention on the good things in your life, what will happen is you'll appreciate the good things. Yeah. Sometimes people who have a really low point, they will think, we've all done it, right? Simple things now. I just had a bit of grass up on it. Immediately, I'm sure a lot of people sat there, and it just kind of took their mind straight away to freedom and being out in a park. The small things that we just took advantage of, and now suddenly they've just been taken away from us. Yeah. But now that we're going through this, you know, this difficulty, where you can be one of two people, you can either be just constantly be pessimistic about it, or you can just reflect on the blessings that we had once upon a time and think about how you're going to make the most of them. And let me tell you, the game, that day when you get into the park the first time, you're going to appreciate you're going to appreciate it the way you did when you were a child. Yeah, we'll be like children. I'll be the first to admit it. I'm out in the garden far more now, because suddenly when I'm confined to a space which is relatively small, I want to make the most of every square inch. You know, I want to make the most of every square inch, because it's been taken away from me. So it's a chance for us to be able to do that. I've said there's two layers of metaphor. The first layer is that you can look at it and say, it's when times are dark that we appreciate the stars. It's when things are dark, when everything's down, do we appreciate the stars. And the second is about asking the question, which is, what exactly do you see when you look up in the night sky? When you're in that, if you put your mindset into that time when you went through difficulty, what exactly were you experiencing? Were you seeing the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Were you seeing the hardships, the difficulty that you're facing? It's almost an impossible thing to even, you know, I mean, it's easy to articulate, to say, but it's something hard to be able to do in the moment. But nonetheless, as an exercise, we should reflect on it and we should learn from it, because the people of God are the people who, when somebody dies, they say, Allah tells us, you know, when they're struck by a calamity, they say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. That they say, look, to Allah we belong, and to Him we shall return. That's what the characteristic of the people of sabr is. You know, there's a great maqam, a status in people who can, in those most dire situations, it's easy for us to say now, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. It's easy to say when someone else tells that someone's died, right? But it's a completely different ball game when it's you yourself going through it. And for the first words to say inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un is a great honor that Allah gives you. So if that's something that we're able to do, that's a good sign. And there's a verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Fussilat, Inna alladhina qalu rabbuna Allah thumma istaqamu. Those who say our Lord is God, and then not just that, but thumma istaqamu, and then they are steadfast. You say I believe in God and you stick to it. Yeah. تَتَنَزَّلُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ, that the angels descend upon such a person. And what do they say? أَلَّا تَخَافُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَبْشِرُوا بِالْجَنَّةِ. And they say, do not fear and do not grieve. وَأَبْشِرُوا بِالْجَنَّةِ, and we give you glad tidings of paradise. الَّتِي كُنْتُمْ تُوعَدُونَ, the kind that you were promised. Yeah, the kind that you were promised. What does that mean? The commentators on this talk about the status of somebody who is steadfast. Right? So what does that mean in the context of talking about it? The context that, in this context, what that means is it's easy to say inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un right now. It's easy to talk about how one should behave when we go through hardships. But the real test, the istiqamah, the test of istiqamah, meaning how steadfast are we in what we say, the claim that we're making right now, when we're going through tribulation, that's istiqamah, right? That's the steadfastness that we're judged on. And the Quran gives us glad tidings for somebody who is able to do that. Somebody who's able to say, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, somebody who's able to remember that everyone comes from God and belongs to God and returns back to God. As the Quran tells us that you were in the ground, we raised you, and then we put you back into the ground, and we shall raise you a second time, which is about the hereafter. So this journey of man that we're on, and the Quran's told us that many times over. But this verse is quite powerful in Surah Fussilat, because it says the sign when you're able to do that, when you just not only say it but you actually live it. And when you go through that difficulty, then when those angels come to your house and they look at you, they address you directly and they say, Allah takhafu, that do not fear, because when we go through calamity, the thing that hits us the hardest is the fear of the unknown, of what the world's going to be like now that the person. The fear of how do I love somebody I don't see? The fear of how do I be in a house that feels empty? All of these things are fears that completely overwhelm us, and the angels come and tell you, as the Quran testifies, Allah takhafu wa la tahzanu, and don't be saddened by this state. So the angels tell us, do not be saddened by this state. Wa abshiru bil jannah, and put your mind, change your direction, meaning don't think about that and think about paradise, because Allah has promised somebody in your state to do what you're doing. God has promised you paradise, because allati kuntum tu'adun is the paradise that you've been promised. What's interesting is, and I'm going to stop at this inshallah, is it's really hard to try and summarize this in about an hour or so. To be honest, there's a lot that's going on in this poem, and my mind is jumbled in the sense that I need to structure it to explain it, but then I need to try and get it into one lesson. Really, I need about 3 lessons on each couplet. The Shaykh, when he talks about this, there's some interesting things in here. Firstly, even the number of letters in this is not an accident. He's a great grammarian, a poet. He deliberately, the number of letters in each couplet are equal. The value of those numbers, the letters is also equal. So he's thought this through, and he uses words in his poem and he alludes to Quran. So everything I've said now is alluded to in his poem. I've just not made explicit links, but the idea of darkness being sin, being associated with sin, darkness preceding light, all from the Quran. As I said, there's many verses in the Quran where God juxtaposes day and night, and he talks about sin in that context, and I've given you a few examples. He talks about darkness, but he also makes allusion to the idea of this, focusing on light. And light is, remember, is also what angels are made of. Yeah. So there's an allusion there. There's a very subtle allusion to the verse that I've just mentioned, which is where the angels give you glad tidings. The light gives you glad tidings. If you, in other words, if you step out of the darkness, or if you stop looking at the darkness, what you see is light, and light is that angelic form that tells you abshiru bil jannah, that we are promising you paradise if you remember God in this state. The next lesson, the third couplet is وَصَحَابُ الْخَيْرِ لَهُ مَطَرٌ فَإِذَا جَاءَ الْإِبَانُ تَجِي, which is what I've called that one fear. That one is now moving on from, if we started in empowerment, which is the moment that calamity hits you, you don't run from it. Then number two, we said it's about perspective. Is in that moment, where is your mind? What are you thinking about? You can either focus on the hardship, or you can focus on the ease that's to follow. Or better still, is to find the blessing within the tribulation, because there is nothing is free from a blessing, even within tribulation, because when you have tribulation, it's through the hardship that you sometimes remember the things that you value, the things that are important. Yeah. When you're sick, you value health. So it's in that tribulation. So when you are sad, you appreciate happiness. Yeah. But what this is calling towards also is, when you're happy, appreciate sadness. Make sure you do it the other way around too. So always, this is something that kind of gives us balance. The third couplet is about fear, because fear is the biggest thing that kind of completely overwhelms us when we're in distress. It's the fear of, will I ever recover? The fear of, how will I replace that emptiness that I'm feeling if you've lost a loved one? All of these things come from fear. And the verse in Surah Baqarah that I mentioned last week, which is the verse on sabr, where Allah says, Inna Allaha ma'as sabirin, Allah is the one who's the patient. He tells us, وَلْنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ, that I will certainly test you. And he gives us a number of things that he's going to test us on. The very first thing he says is what? He says fear. The very first thing I'm going to test you on is fear. And the rest of those things that I mentioned also contain fear within them. So fear is the thing that you really need to try and manage. And this is couplet number 3, where he talks about what happens when fear overcomes you. When you're overwhelmed by fear, then what can you miss out on? So it's about shifting our mindset and not being controlled by fear, because if we are, then think about everything that we lose, we miss out on. Simple things like, how many people have not applied for a job out of fear that they'll be rejected, and it's a job that somebody got that, and you were probably more capable of it. The simple things in life that fear just gets in the way. So this is about, don't let fear kind of take control of you. I'm going to stop there, inshallah. If there's any questions, I'll try and answer them. Otherwise, we'll. In addition to these classes, there is also. Yes, good reminder. So just so everyone knows, tomorrow we're doing a live podcast at 8 o'clock. Myself and Maulana Sheikh Sajjad with Sidi Izhar. We have a podcast called the Conversation Series, Sacred Text Conversations, where we pick a number of topics and we talk about them. We release them pretty much every week. But tomorrow we're doing our first live session, and it's Q&A. So there's lots of questions that we pick up every now and again from people, and it's really hard to try and answer all questions, especially in forums like this. So if there's questions that we haven't answered, then that's a good chance to just come online. It'll be on YouTube Live. Ask those questions, and it will be completely unscripted. And to be honest, if you don't have a question, come and listen in, because it's a good chance just for us to have a bit of a sit down, informal, and let's, where it's not really a lesson, but it's it's something that maybe you feel like you're part of something. It's a community. We're creating a community. We're trying to create a community in this difficult time. So the question is, what text will be covering? The text is called Qasida al-Munfarijah. Teba, if you can just share that on YouTube, that link. It's written by someone called Ibn Nahwi. Do look it up. You mentioned al-Ghazali. Funnily enough, Imam Ghazali also has a poem, and guess what it's called? It's called Qasida al-Munfarijah. So he also has a poem called al-Munfarijah. This is not that, but that's also a very, very, very good poem. Will Ghazali ever be covered? There are lots of people out there that have covered numerous texts of al-Ghazali. and I would absolutely love to go through something of his. But what it requires is, with someone like Ghazali, personally, I would like to have something a bit more established, where we have students that are regulars, and then we can partake in one of these texts, because there's a lot of Ghazali's texts are quite dense, and there's quite a lot to go through. So it's, just to be able to do justice to it, I would like to have more time. But certainly there's lots of, Ghazali's written a huge amount of lots of books that are very beneficial. So perhaps in the future, maybe. But at this stage, it depends on how long this lockdown continues. I plan to do a couplet a week, and might try and increase it to a couple of couplets, and then in the next, maybe I don't know, goodness knows whether we'll get through this poem. But if we do, and we still have time, then maybe we can pick up something from Ghazali. Are there any other questions? Okay, so there's no question. So I'm going to assume there's no question, in which case we'll stop there. Sallallahu wasallam wa baraka ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Jazakumullahu khair. Hope it's been a benefit to you. Please remember us in your du'as. We're all on this journey together. Inshallah, if there's any mistakes that we've made, then please do forgive us. Please feed back to us on info@sacredtext.co.uk. If there's anything that we can learn from, please do tell us. Inshallah, we're always up for feedback, and do follow us and do all that stuff that you do on social media, like subscribing and other stuff. So keep following us, and we'll do our best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Oh, I was just about to shut this down. I saw a question. This is more related to the Book of Remembrance, but I find my intention is more so those of you who need to go, inshallah, you can go. I'll still answer this question because it's coming just as I was about to press them. Oh, there's quite a few questions coming in now. See, this is what I mean. Like, the questions start coming in just as what text is good for disciplining the soul? Maybe Disciplining the Soul by Imam Ghazali. And that might be a good place to start. I'm still typing this. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay, I'll give you a few minutes. Those of you who need to go, please do. Don't wait. I'm happy to wait for a few minutes, inshallah. So this is more related to the Book of Remembrance, but I find my intention is more because I wish to find peace in my heart rather than it is for Allah. How do I change this? I think that a good starting point would be to not make the two things. To not separate the two things. Yeah. I want to make it clear. It's an important question, so I'm going to tackle this. It's an important question because I'm not a murshid. Yeah, I'm not a sheikh of tariqah or anything like that. So I'm not making claims as to I can solve your your spiritual dilemmas. What I can do is I can narrate what some of the great scholars of the past and the great mystics, the awliya of the past have written, and that's what I'm doing with Kitab al-Adhkar. But having said that, things like this are things that many of us do wrestle with. This, it's how do you separate self from God, ego from God, and all of these things. I would say, when you say it's for myself, I'm doing it for my own sense of peace rather than for the sake of God. I would say stop differentiating between those two things. Yeah, stop differentiating between those two things. See it as peace. When we say heart, first of all, we're talking about the spiritual heart. Okay, so that's the first thing we've got to be absolutely clear about, is when we say we're looking for peace in our spiritual heart. So the place that you're looking for this sakina in, this peace in, is what's called the spiritual heart. Now, when somebody says, I'm looking for peace, or let's say, in the question you asked, which is, I'm trying to find peace for myself, I would say, firstly, the way I've structured the answer is, number one, don't be too hard on yourself. Yeah, don't be too hard on yourself in that. And that's what I mean by don't separate God from that. Don't look at it as I'm doing it for myself, for God. Because If just imagine a stairway where we're kind of moving up the ranks towards God. Yeah. And let's imagine that highest station that you can have is what's called mushahada, which is where you're witnessing God. Yeah. Metaphorically, in the sense that you live every moment as though you see God. That's the highest stage of ihsan as per the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. What we can't do is, so each step is a step towards that. Along that journey, somewhere up that ladder, we reach a stage of delineation where we can delineate between what is pure ego and what is purely godly. Yeah. That stage of delineation is itself a maqam, it's a stage. So I think if you try and do that too early on, you're just going to create a lot of anxiety for yourself. It's probably better if we're at the stage of a'mal. The stage of a'mal is we do the things that are the set of ibadat that have been ordained by God and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We just do them the best that we can. Yeah. And if you do them the best that you can and you strive to always improve them, and that's simple things. I'm not talking about really trying to get all, too high level in spirituality. Simple things like, look, when you stand for prayer for maghrib, for instance, and you say Allahu Akbar, they will, when you finish, you just sit for a second and just take a minute out. And that minute, ask yourself what you thought about just before you said Allahu Akbar. And I guarantee you won't remember it. You won't remember what was happening then, because the thing is the presence wasn't there. Now, how do you solve that? Well, tomorrow, when you stand for prayer, give yourself 1 minute, and in that 1 minute, just try and just leave everything else out. One of the shuyukh used to say, he says, leave your problems, leave your ego at the door when you come in. And that's kind of the approach you should take with the prayer, which is whatever problems, whatever's going through your mind that's really occupying it in that moment, that's personal to you, just hang it up at the door, walk in and pray and think about the words you recite, which is a lot easier when you've studied Arabic or read it, or even if you haven't studied it, you've read through translations. When you say, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, that you mean all praise belongs to Allah. I'm not saying you'll embody it and every cell in your body saying Alhamd, because that's a station. But the conscious, at the level of the conscious, you can put effort into doing that. Just like reading a book, right? Just imagine reading a book where you're not paying attention. And then imagine reading that book when you're completely enthralled in every single word in that book. What's the difference between how you feel a chapter into that book when you do A and when you do B? It's completely different. And both of those are within your control. You know what you did, you know how you did it, you know whether you were interested or whether you were disinterested. Yeah, these are things that are completely within our gift. They don't require us to have a bolt from the heavens that just makes us realize that these are simple things that we should be attempting to do in every single prayer. Just always strive to do a bit more. And I promise you, and I hope for myself, that if we do this every single time, you can't but be in a better place in terms of your connection, a year down the line, if you keep putting this into practice, than you are today. Yeah, so it's about constantly doing that. Don't worry about trying to think, well, what is my, getting too precise about, am I doing this for myself? Am I doing this for God? And the reason why I say that is because that is a station which comes up the chain. And until we're ready for that, what ends up happening is you give yourself a lot of waswasa, right? A lot of whisperings and misgivings, which can be problematic for a lot of people. It's called waswasa. Yeah, it's called waspas. And it's a tool that itself can be used against us. Yeah, it's a tool that the shaitan can use against us. So don't get caught up in things that are too mystical for us to immediately comprehend. Stay within the level of the consciousness of focusing on your ibadat, focusing on doing, praying and reading, praying with meaning and trying to understand it the best that you can. Try and read as much Quran as you can. Try and do more privately than you do publicly. all of these little things that we at a level of consciousness can appreciate. If you do those, honestly, that's going to really open things up. And Kitab al-Adhkar, when we get to it, when we get into the Adhkar, you'll see the Shaykh, although he sets us up with this high maqam, which is what I was talking about last week, you'll see that a lot of it is him telling us that's his husn al-dhan. He's telling us, look, all of us have the capability of being angelic. Yeah, we all have the capacity within us to have mushahada, and his husn al-dhan, his opinion is that we all are at that level. Yeah, but when he goes to that book, he gives us really simple things to do, which hopefully collectively will up our game, raise us a bit better. We're a bit more focused now in our prayer. We have a bit more of the old mindfulness, which is basically what it is. Yeah, so I don't know if that helps in answering your question. I hope it does. It's in a nutshell, it's don't overcomplicate it for yourself. Take it step by step, and inshallah you'll get very far. And this is in line with the sunnah of the Prophet. Do small baby steps and do them consistently. New background for next week start. Yeah. We'll see. We'll do a poll and see what the preferred backgrounds are, and then I might put one up. How does one overcome the battle between being simultaneously overwhelmed by grief and being patient, i.e. in the case of losing both parents in quick succession, even sometime later being absolutely gripped by a sadness at their loss? That's a good question, a very hard question to answer, and it's what poems like this are really hopefully kind of helping us to work through these struggles. How do you do it? The thing, firstly, I would say sabr is to be patient does not mean to not be sad, or to be intensely sad. You can be patient and yet still be intensely sad. The difference between somebody who has sabr and somebody who doesn't have sabr is the person who has patience has yaqeen and faith and hinges everything ultimately on the plan of God. Yeah, if you have all of that, if you believe, as hard as things are, if you believe that this is within the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that you believe that one day you will see your parents, and you believe that this is a temporary separation, and that you believe that Allah is all merciful and that He's all forgiving, and you have hope in God's forgiveness and His mercy, and you believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He's given you a hardship, that He is testing you, and that He has faith in you passing that test. Yeah, that's the beauty of this, because when Allah gives you a burden He's telling you you can cope with it. Yeah, and the amazing kind of thing here is there's a term in Arabic we use of reliance on God. Yeah, it's called tawakkul. The word is tawakkul, which is complete reliance on God. And the word tawakkul comes from the root letters wakala, which means where you have somebody who is who takes the power of attorney from you. Yeah, a wakil. Another word is wakil, somebody who takes the power of attorney from you. Now, tawakkul means is where you try, because tawakkul, the scale of tafa'ul, I've mentioned it before, the scale that appears, any word that appears in the scale of tafa'ul often entails a great deal of difficulty. A great deal of difficulty, which means tawakkul requires a great deal of difficulty. The idea that you can transfer responsibility or the power of attorney, the power to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, say this belongs to you, is extremely difficult, extremely difficult. And the Quran tells us that when you go through hardship, then what should you do? He said, in God's fatawakkal ala Allah, yeah, do your best and direct yourself to God as much as you can. It's not to say you're not going to grieve. It's not to say that you're not going to go. The verse I recited before, where the angels say to a person who goes through difficulty, what do they say? They say don't, la takhafu wa la tahzanu. They say don't fear and do not grieve. That tells you that the person they're addressing is afraid and is grieving. What they're telling him is that you have no need to grieve and you have no need to fear. So the act of the grieving process is a very natural thing that we go through. We know, and inshallah, maybe on another occasion I can talk about this a bit more. But there's a four steps to the grieving process, and part of that is it's denial. Part of that is anger. Part of that is intense sadness. These are all very natural steps that we go through. Yeah. And what sabr means is that you don't forget God in any of that. And I think if you're doing that, if the fact that if somebody's asking a question where they're saying I'm overwhelmed with grief, and how do I be patient, it means you're already being patient because you are asking God for answers. Yeah. So I don't dichotomize it. The thing is, stick to your sharia, stick to the sharia, stick to your prayer. Because the Quran tells us when you go through hardship, stick to your prayer, because you will find, and the prayer is literally the actual prayer, but also it's symbolic for go back to God, because the closest we can be to God is when we are actually in the prostration. Yeah, where in prostration we are closest to God. So this idea of find your peace, find your answers, find everything, your solace, by directing your kind of grief to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But don't ever make the mistake of thinking you can't grieve. Yeah, that is not healthy. So this is a misnomer. This idea that I shouldn't be sad, I shouldn't cry, I shouldn't be angry is a complete misnomer. We know from a purely from a point of view of modern psychology of just how human beings function, is if you bottle up pain, if you bottle grief, it manifests in ways that are unimaginable for many of us. At its extreme, it can completely tilt somebody's mind, where people fall into, people can have psychosis. And I know of people that have gone through this, people who have masked their grief. And I've got, a few people in mind who have suffered later, of people I've helped try to counsel in whatever way I could, people who had a psychotic episode. I can think of 2 people that had a psychotic episode, and when they were, I directed them to the appropriate people to help them, meaning psychologists and psychiatrists. The conclusion was that when you unravel it all, what it comes down to is people just didn't work through their grief. It was divorce, it was death, it was these are extreme cases where it can happen to people. Other people go through depression, and so we can't be in denial of it. We can't live in this denial that doesn't happen. These things do happen, so we've got to manage it, and we can't make this weird argument that somehow grieving is not religious. It's not something that we're encouraged to do. We're absolutely encouraged to do these things. Yeah, absolutely. It's in the, there's plenty of hadith. There's differences. There's hadith on how long you can grieve for, but they're misunderstood. The act of grieving is about the physical, the kind of the ritualistic grieving that happens when somebody dies. That's different, because when you keep doing a ritualistic grieving, what happens is the person that has lost somebody never moves on. Yeah, think about it practically. You need to move on. And again, from a human psychology point of view, when you lose somebody, you have to come to terms with it, which means at some point you have to pack their clothes away. It means at some point you have to accept that they're no longer going to be in that room. You have to open that room and you've got to redecorate, and you've got to do what you have to do to start moving on. Yeah, because otherwise it's not healthy. Yeah, and that's what the hadith, the Prophet calls towards, which is that ritualistic grieving has to come to an end so that society goes back to normal. And when society goes back to normal, then you will start going back to normal, and you learn to accept, because the people around you have. When people around you start accepting that life will continue to go on even though you've lost somebody, your parents, and people who also love them, when they start doing that, what it starts doing is it gives you permission to also start doing that. Yeah, so it's actually a very important process, but nonetheless, there is an aspect of this which is about moving on. Question: my prayer does not subtract nor add to Allah, and if I do not pray hypothetically, I'm only wronging and hurt myself. So isn't my motivation to pray only going to be for myself? is not subtract nor add to Allah, and if I do not pray hypothetically, I'm only wronging and hurting myself. So isn't my motivation to pray only going to be for myself? Yes. Yes. No. Yes and no. The first part, yes. The second part, not necessarily. In that, will it only hurt yourself? Yes. Does that mean that could only be your motivation? Absolutely no. No. That's the challenge. Challenge is, how do you rise above your own ego and not be motivated just by your desire to self-preserve, and you worship because God deserves worship? Yeah. There's an aspect, just think about it like this. If someone has done something for you, yeah, if someone has done something for you, no, let's put it in a really simple example that we can appreciate now, right now, which is there are many young people out there who are completely heedless of the advice that's been given to us about self-isolating, staying home, social distancing, completely heedless. But there are many young people out there that are not. There are many young people out there that appreciate it as staying home, and not necessarily because they've got elderly people in the house. It's just because they understand the value of it. They see the bigger picture. And not only that, but there's probably yet a smaller number who completely value the work that those staff on the front line are doing to help keep them and society safe. Yeah, they are able to appreciate something which is and not only that, but then those people will give. There are many people out there that are donating time, young people who are going out and selflessly, let's assume that it's selfless, going out there and delivering things, taking food. Companies are taking food to hospitals and so on and so forth, and supporting them. Yeah. What does that mean? Well, that means that actually you can be motivated by accepting the good that others do, even though you're not necessarily the recipient of that good. Yeah, you value the institution for existing. The appreciation that something like the NHS exists itself is the motivator for you to give something. You're not necessarily motivated by the fact that one day you're going to need it. It's perfectly possible for someone to be motivated by something, by the institution, because it deserves being recognized, and not necessarily be motivated by your own need for it. Which one's easier? Of course, it's much easier to be motivated. There's no greater motivation than when you have a need, right? There's no more easier motivation than that. Absolutely, I 100% agree with that. But it doesn't mean that that's where we should stop. And that shouldn't be aspirational. The aspiration should be to go higher than that, to worship God because he deserves being worshipped, not worship him because we want paradise. But that's a maqam, and I'm not trying to make it. I'm certainly not saying that I'm at that level. I just want to make it absolutely clear. I don't want to come across as somebody who's claiming a status or a state here. The fact is, that is a maqam. There's a great anecdote about Rabi al-Basriya. Rabi al-Basri, it's an anecdote, yeah. Seen running through the streets of Basra, and somebody said she had two buckets of water in her hand, and somebody stopped and said, "Where are you going?" She said, "I'm putting out the fires of hell." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Because she goes, I don't want to worship God because I fear the fire." Yeah. So the old mystics would tell stories like this, and the idea is that, look, don't just assume that's the only level at which you should operate. There's a higher level, and that's what hamd means, by the way. Alhamd in the Quran literally means to praise God because he's worthy of praise, not to praise him because he's done something for you. That, by the way, is shukr. In Arabic, the word shukr means to praise somebody because they've done something for you. To praise somebody because they deserve it is called hamd. It's two different things. So, yeah. What text is good for this? I'd say Discipline the Soul by Imam Ghazali. Is it permissible to do death anniversary khatam of Quran? Yes, absolutely. To do it it's fine. Is it a bid'ah? Yes, it is. But I would say this is a time for people to remember. Look, the Prophet ﷺ told us that there are 3 things that stay behind when you die. Yeah, one of them is a pious child. A pious child. So what does that mean? A pious child is someone who does something that is a sadaqah jariyah for you. That will be, that's going to continue after you pass. If that means you have to set aside a time so that you remember that person you make dua from, why not? That's different, however, than if you sat around every year and you started mourning that person. That's not right, because that's not in the spirit of moving on and having faith in God that that person is in a better place. Yeah, but to do Khatm al-Quran for that person is absolutely fine. From the one who asked the above, I'm with you and I really appreciate your answer. Thank you. It has cleared up a few things I had. Alhamdulillah, I'm glad it has. Right, I think I'm going to call it a night now because it's 10 o'clock and everyone needs to get to bed. Okay, inshallah. So until next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.